Let's get into a spoiler-free movie review now. I want to talk about The Fabelmans, directed by Steven Spielberg. The movie is semi-autobiographical, and just after watching the trailer for this movie for the very first time, I knew it was going to be something special. But man, is this movie a love letter to cinema. It is one of the best movies already I've seen of the year, easily already entered my top 5, and I want to tell you why. But before I get into my full spoiler-free movie review, here's just a little bit of the Fabelmans trailer.
Movies are dreams that you never forget.
You dismiss what he does that's playful or imaginative. You could afford to be a little encouraging.
You can't just love something, you also have to take care of it.
It's more important than your hobby.
Can you stop calling it a hobby?
Mom got a monkey.
Why'd you get a monkey?
Because I needed a laugh.
So this movie, it's about a character named Sammy who is based on Steven Spielberg, and he calls this movie semi-autobiographical mainly because he didn't really want to promote a movie about himself. Maybe he felt it was a little bit too self-indulgent. He isn't that kind of a guy, so I find respect in that. But the movie is so accurate of what actually happened in his life. So even if you go back and watch some documentaries about Steven Spielberg, read his interviews, all of this stuff he has talked about throughout his life, and he's just put it all into a movie and embellished some things to make it a little bit more cinematic. But all of the themes regarding his family, regarding how he got into filmmaking, regarding his parents' divorce, all of that actually happened. So almost scene for scene, plotline for plotline, you are learning about Steven Spielberg's life. And the movie starts with him as a kid. His parents go to take him to his very first movie ever, and that is kind of where his passion first begins. His parents take him to watch the greatest show on earth, and that's where it all starts. And that is actually the first movie that Steven Spielberg ever watched. And as a kid, he was so enthralled by it. And his mom is very encouraging of his passion for making movies, but his dad is not. He is an electrical engineer. And throughout the entire movie, you see this theme come up again and again because his dad doesn't want him focusing on movies. He keeps calling it a hobby, makes it sound very insulting, and it is hard for Sammy in the movie to form a relationship with his dad because he really just makes so little of his passion, and he doesn't see that he is trying to make this his goal in life. Like, this is what he was set out to do. Even though he's a good dad, he is a really involved dad, tries to be there. He just doesn't really get it because he is this very straight-laced engineer guy. So I found that relationship throughout the entire movie to be pretty interesting. I feel like it would be kind of, if you made this movie today, it would be a kid wanting to be a YouTuber and their parents being like, well, you can't really do much with YouTube, so you should really kind of go to college and focus on studies, and you know, YouTube is just a hobby. But now we see it is possible. So back in the day, filmmaking was probably YouTube now, even though I still hope that the kids out there who want to be filmmakers, and I would highly encourage, if you do have a kid who is interested in making movies, interested in making YouTube videos, they should definitely watch this movie. I wish this movie came out when I was 10 years old. Around that age, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a film director. I remember my brother had this old VHS recorder video camera, and we would make movies, oftentimes like kung fu movies, horror movies. And then later in life, I was able to get like a DV camera with those little small tapes, and I would make movies, and it was always kind of my passion that I would kind of follow and I wanted to do, but I realized how hard it was, and I also didn't really have anybody around me telling me that it was a possible thing to do. And it all kind of comes back to Sammy in this movie and how all of these things in his life are very chaotic. As the movie progresses, in the very start of this movie, he has a very picturesque portrait of a family, almost like it looks too perfect, but as you go through the movie, things start to get more and more difficult and more real, and you start to realize all the problems that they actually have and how the relationship changes between his parents. So in a way, filmmaking is kind of the only constant that Sammy has in the movie because it is the only thing he can really control. And man, have I not related to something so bold in a movie before, whether it be doing podcasts or me doing comedy or doing anything creative when I feel like in my life, oftentimes it is anxiety that just ruins everything good in my life. But I feel like if I can have some kind of control over something where I am dictating things, it makes me feel in control. So doing this podcast, writing jokes, for me, that is me being able to control things in my life. And I think that is why I gravitate towards my passions. So seeing that depicted in a movie like this, I was like, wow. And I just felt like, hey, I have something in common with Steven Spielberg. This movie looks a lot different than any other Steven Spielberg movie. And with a subject like this being based on his life, you feel like it could be so self-indulgent. And I think that's partially why he didn't call it just a straight-on biopic autobiography. But the thing about Steven Spielberg, he always has the viewer in mind, and this movie reminded me of that because the movie does cover him as a teenager making movies, and it shows that entire process of him getting the camera, talking about the film, showing the editing process, and to a normal viewer, maybe that could be kind of boring. I could see how easily you can make a movie like that and it'd be very boring. But that entire process he makes feel so magical. And I think my favorite parts in this movie were the moments where he was filming a movie, editing a movie, and then you see the final product. And just knowing that Steven Spielberg took a risk on that, but completely nailed it. And you really learn a lot about what shaped him as a director, how he tried to make things interesting, and how innovative he was even as a teenager. I think one of my favorite scenes, again, was during that filmmaking process. He was making this kind of shootout Western movie, and during the editing process, he realized that some of the gunshots didn't seem accurate. He's like, that looks fake. No one's going to buy that because it looks fake. And then he figures out and gets inspired on how to make the gunshots look accurate. And I thought that little detail was perfect in this movie. So it shows that he had that passion early on, even while making these very, very low budget rudimentary films. He already had the vision. He was on his way to become Steven Spielberg. And then you get into the actors in this movie. Paul Dano was great, and you just see the range on him. He is one of my favorite actors. I mean, to go from playing the Riddler in the Batman to the father in this movie just shows that he really has no restrictions on what he can do. He can be a convincing father, and he can be an all-out psychotic villain. I love Paul Dano as the casting choice of the dad in this movie. Michelle Williams, who is another treasure, I think gives one of her best performances of her career. She'll easily be nominated for Best Actress, so I don't think that's a stretch in saying that, but I think she could finally win an Oscar with this performance. I think she gave the best one out of anybody in this cast. Also have to mention Seth Rogen. I haven't mentioned his performance in this, and how cool of him to be able to get into a Steven Spielberg movie. And you kind of forget that he's a really good actor. I know we just associate him with comedies. And even though his character is funny in this movie, he really proved to me that he has those acting chops as well and can stand up with people like Michelle Williams and Paul Dano and not look out of place. You also have Gabriel LaBelle as the young Steven Spielberg, who is a really great new talent. I thought he also did an excellent job in this movie. And then you have Steven Spielberg as director. Again, I don't think it's a stretch in saying that he'll be nominated for Best Director, probably win that one. But I think The Fabelmans easily has a shot at winning Best Picture this year. And even at the 2.5 hour range, I thought I would have been a little bit tired of a movie that's really just a coming of age story, a family drama. Very rarely does a movie like that, to me, warrant a 2.5 hour runtime. But I have to tell you, I did not want this movie to end. It was so magical, visually so appealing to me. It's like candy for the eyes. It's like chicken soup for the soul. You know, those old poetry books from back in the day. It is all the things that I look for in a movie. I will say the only thing I wish this movie would have had, and the thing I thought it was going to be a little bit more about, was him as a kid. And at the start of the movie, it does focus on him using his siblings as subject in his films. And I found that part of the movie to be so heartwarming. It had a little bit more of a comedic tone. So I think if it had more of that, I would have said it was a completely perfect movie. So if I had to give this movie a rating, it is so close to being perfect, but I give it 4.5 out of 5 film reels for The Fabelmans.